Awesome. So, yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. And today I'm just going to talk about from process to profit, how AI refocuses agile on real business value. Ultimately, I think that this whole AI discussion in general that's happening across the field of agility, at least from the perspective of this conference, is a good thing. Because I believe in many ways it brings us back to what I believe are the core guiding principles of what Agile really is about. For me, it's way more than about the frameworks and the methods and velocity and all this other great stuff. It initially was about us providing more value to the customer or to the end user. I'll be mindful about saying doing it quicker and half the time and all that type of stuff, but the focus was really about value. So that's what we're going to look at. And today I'm going to just walk through different ways that I'm using it. Some of my clients are using it, and potentially you can start using it to be able to start supporting that. Mindful to say I'll do some demos a bit later. Maybe I give a bit more context around it just to show some different ways that you might be able to use AI if you're not using it already. That's not suggestion to say that, hey, everyone should go out and use that. We're already aware about governance, policy, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But before I continue, if it's okay, let me just quickly give you a little bit about my background and how I come to be here today. So, Ade Shokoya, background, nearly 20 years in agile and digital transformation. Started as Scrum Master, well, business analyst and a Scrum Master, then a coach, trainer, and consultant. So been in this field close to 20 odd years, working in some of these different organizations. I'm also fortunate to be a keynote speaker at different conferences around the world, which offers me the opportunity to be able to get out and understand and see what's happening globally, but more importantly, for what individuals are dealing with or what they're doing on the ground. And Waterfall to Agile is a book that I wrote back in 2010. Um, but like I said, I think we are at a very interesting stage right now. I think, as we heard in that kind of opening panel discussion, yeah, we've got access to AI right now, which is a powerful tool. But also, I think for those of us, which is everybody in this call, coming with the right mindsets and bringing our experience to the table, then this provides us with a great opportunity to increase the amount of value that we are delivering to our clients. And also, I mean, in terms of our own career advancements, business advancements, however you might want to look at it. So let's take a step back. Let's take a step back to what the Agile promise was. Yes, based on, and I'm going to be a bit raw with some of the things that I'm going to say, but based on the marketing and the messaging that's gone out about Agile, we won't go into that whole context. Over time, many promises have been made, and there's a reality around that. But what I'm talking about this is if we go back to the core principles and the core values, which kind of formed or shaped the initial Agile movement, then one of the key things that underlies it was the promise was about outcomes. It was about us creating value. And of course, and we'll look at the fact that actually, when we talk about value, what do we actually really mean? Okay. We use the word value, but what do we actually mean? Because value can be quite vast and it can be quite fluid sometimes. But if we look at it, it was really about creating some measurable form of outcomes. Um, you know, and of course, it had all the other add-ons around it: faster, cheaper, better. As some of us might know, that may not apply in every context, but the core focus was really about value. And then over time, of course, for a number of different reasons, the focus has moved into things like methods and frameworks. I'm sure many of us have been involved or still see some of those arguments on LinkedIn and other platforms about one approach being better than another approach, etc. And so it's become about the things, the outputs, less about actually what are we trying to achieve, how are we measuring that, how are we inspecting, adapting through that process to ensure that actually what we are creating is really of value. Okay. Now, some of you have most probably experienced this before as well. I mean, how many of you have ever felt or been around teams that are busy but not necessarily productive, right? They're just doing stuff, being really busy, doing stuff, velocity, velocity, velocity. But at the end of the project, I know I've worked on many multi-million pound projects where you ask at the end of it, okay, what was your return on investment? And you get like a blank stare, like, huh? How successful was it? Did you get a chance to actually validate some of your assumptions? Where did you pivot or persevere? Huh? We've done that project. We're moving on. No one's really measuring it. So it's really about how do we move ourselves back to that kind of baseline of creating what the value should be. How do we really get back to focusing on that? Yeah. And so one of the things that I mentioned here is we talk about value. Yes, it's definitely way more than working software. In many ways, I mean, there's been that debate going around, which is a whole different discussion point around actually, do we need to change the manifesto in terms of it moving away from just referring to working software? Many times I talk about it in terms of creating value or tangible outcomes, depending on what that might be. But when we talk about value, what do we actually mean? We sometimes talk about, yeah, we're measuring value, we're going to do this, and this is going to be value for the customer, but we don't always define that very, very clearly. As you might see from this pyramid of value model, there are so many different dimensions of value. And depending on what the context is or what the solution is or what the problem is that we're trying to find a solution to, it can involve multiple aspects of this. And as a starting point, I think that if we're talking about how we move back to really delivering what's of value, AI can definitely help us with that. It can help us to be able to look at what we are trying to achieve, understand the core personas, understand their pain points, bring in the empathy maps. Because let's face it, all of this bring using AI doesn't mean that we shouldn't follow the good practices that we know that may add value to what we're trying to do, that may help us to understand the context a lot better. And so from that point of view, it helps us to start identifying, well, actually, here's potentially where the value might lie. Here's where we might need to combine different things. Using AI again, and we'll look at some examples shortly, we can also put in the constraints around the context and all the other great stuff to help us to identify it. But ultimately, that's where we're trying to get back to. Now, depending on what organizations you might be in, some people might call this the concept to cash pipeline, idea to impact, whatever it is. But ultimately, what is it we're trying to do through agility? We are trying to create some form of outcome, and we are typically going from some form of idea, some form of concept, all the way to delivery and beyond to real world feedback. Of course, in my experience, lots of organizations, like I was saying before, may stop at delivery. We've delivered the thing. Hey, great, let's move on. We're not necessarily going to get real world feedback. We're not necessarily going to measure it because the end goal for us was about delivery. But if we look at it from the point of view of providing better products, services, or better outcomes, then it would follow that actually we may want to get some real world feedback to understand did we achieve that end goal? How did we actually get the thing that we're talking about? And so what we can do is look at different ways, for example, how we can use in the design thinking stage, ideation. Yes, as many of you know, before we get into doing the scrum or iterations and sprints, realistically, we may want to have some form of design thinking phase where we actually work out what is it we're trying to achieve here? What's the value that we're trying to create? Is this the problem that we should be going after? Is it the best problem use of our time resources and all that other great stuff? Then moving on to actually creating the kind of iterations, the deliveries, the features, understanding that part and getting into the delivery part. And so let's actually walk through each of these stages, and I'll just show you some different ways. I'm sure some of you are already doing this, that we can actually start using AI to support what we're trying to achieve in those areas. Now, just at the top of the head, I mean, if we think about it, so if we think about this design thinking stage, this can easily be supercharged by AI. Okay. So, in terms of understanding, like we said before, what is the problem space that we're trying to address? Who are the key personas? I mean, I can't tell you the number of projects that I've worked on in the past whereby actually the design thinking stages have been skipped. Could be for any number of reasons. Sometimes there's a belief that the problem space is understood well enough that there's no need for it. And some of it, there's that misunderstanding that, well, actually, we're doing Agile here, so we don't need to do those parts. it can be whatever, right? And sometimes it's actually the amount of effort, time, whatever it takes to be able to do those processes or to do that part of the end-to-end value chain, as I like to call it, quickly enough. And so now with AI, we can easier, I'm going to use my words quickly, easier for us to be able to actually start identifying some of those things. And I think maybe one of the easiest ways for us to be able to do this would be to just let me just see if I can quickly share this with you. Hold on a second. What I forgot to mention is what I'll do is I'll go for maybe about 30, 40 minutes and then I'll leave some space and time for to answer any questions at the end. Now here we're just going to use, just using ChatGTP. Again, I'm not suggesting that you should use ChatGTP depending on what your organization is, right? In terms of the tooling, this goes back to the whole thing that we're talking about governance. One of the key things, of course, we know about shadow AI, where in the absence of governance, different people might be using different tools within an organization, and that might come with different risks, especially when you're using third-party type tools, which are not necessarily part of your own ecosystem, etc., etc. But for the purpose of what we're doing here, I'm just going to use this just to show you how it could be used in different contexts. So let's say, for example, I'm a product owner. I have a decision that I need to make in regards to, let's say, for example, just for the purpose of this, I work in a bank and we're thinking about actually how do we create some additional products and services? So, having worked in a number of financial institutions over a year, that is a regular question that comes up, of course, from the point of view of staying competitive in the marketplace, moving alongside the market. How would you go about doing that? Now, as a starting point, this does not, and once again, this goes back to what we were saying before. This does not necessarily mean it replaces a human being. Somebody with the right skill sets and right expertise can easily do something like this, run a prompt like this. So in this instance, what we're just saying is, hey, some of you may know with AI, one of the benefits that we have is said that actually within AI, especially tools like ChatGTP, generative AI. So as many of you may know, generative AI are the tools that we've got. So Gemini, ChatGTP, they're generative AI trained on how much amounts of data across the internet and some other sources, and the ability to be able to just generate those responses using natural language, etc. So here we could simply just say, and imagine, I'm going to play the role of a product owner, right? So I'm a product owner, I'm in an organization, we're about to create some AI-powered mortgage pre-approval process. Okay, traditionally, what would I have to do? Maybe I might need to spend days or weeks going away doing some market research, understanding a bit more about the problem space that we're trying to go into, creating the personas, creating empathy maps, understanding their pain points, etc., etc. Using AI doesn't take that away. And with acting as that product owner now, I can simply just put in a prompt. This is a basic type prompt. There's ways that we could also train the system. So some of the assistants that I've got here, they pre-trained, so they understand context better. But let's pull that aside, right? But those are things that are available to everybody with this type of technology. But putting all that aside, even if I just run a prompt like this, put that in there. Okay. Now, again, we know based on what we've just said, data in, data out, rubbish in, rubbish out. We're not necessarily saying, hey, what we're going to do now is just take this and just automatically run with it. But it at least starts the conversation. It at least enables us to get some information. Once again, we'd have to go away, make sure it's credible. But look how that's just shortened the amount of time that it takes. From a mental point of view, the amount of time and thinking overload that is involved is significantly less. So as a product owner, I can now start looking at this and then requerying it. I could use the voice functionality on AI to be able to have an engaged conversation with the AI system to then bring my own personal experience, understanding that AI doesn't have all the answers, doesn't understand the context, back and forth and have that conversation, which then helps me to be able to come up with some information like this, which at least starts and feeds into that whole kind of design thinking point of view, right? And then I could even then take it a little bit further. I know we had some, it was mentioned about it before. Um, I could then follow it up with something like this. Again, I'm not saying that I'm just trying to make it simplified just to demonstrate what we're talking about here. And then I could then just easily put in another prompt, which um, can then analyze a business case. So you'd still go through the process of making sure that actually what you've got going on here is the right business case. You fed it the right information. It's understanding things in the way that you want it to. If nothing else, shortening the cycle it takes you to write up that business case. And then I could easily just still then follow it through by this and say, okay, cool. Based on the business case, come up with some epics, user stories, etc., etc. Okay. Again, gives me that. Not saying that we just leave that totally down to the AI. As a product owner, I can then sit with that and start refining that and saying, okay, yeah, actually, didn't even think about that. I mean, I'm not sure about some of you, but I mean, when I use it in different areas of my business, or I'd use it in terms of when I'm working with clients as well, many times, even regardless of my personal experience, many times AI comes up with some insights and things that you're like, okay, wow, never thought about that. Never even thought that angle. Now you mention that, that's an interesting angle. And so product owners can be using that from a point of view of understanding the product, getting a better idea about what the product is that they're trying to create, etc., etc. Even down to things like actually defining the MVP. So just for example, I could turn around and say something like this to it. Again, only to stimulate conversation. This is where human in the loop and personal experience comes into play. You're still going to need somebody who understands the business, who understands, what the outcomes are to be able to still make that final decision. I think one of the things that we might see a lot more with AI is it's going to help separate those who are just using it as a tool and those who are also bringing their experience to increase the value that's being created. I think I'm already seeing that in some contexts whereby actually people in organizations or some of the clients that I'm working with, some individuals maybe just using it. And then when you sit down and you see the output, you actually can see, this person may not necessarily have brought personal experience to the table here, and it can be reflected in the outcomes or the outputs that you get from the AI versus somebody who might sit some time back and forth refining. That might take a few hours refining, putting in ideas, getting it to test out different scenarios. What if? How about if we did this type of thing, which could then lead to a better outcome from your design thinking process? And again, using it as a feedback tool, still can make a decision to say, actually, here's what my MVP might look like. But that just starts giving you some form of idea of what we're talking about here. What else? So when we start looking at prototyping, I mean, for the whole design thinking stage, and then if you start thinking about actually, how can you significantly reduce that? Okay. How do you reduce the time it takes to create an MVP? And if we look at actually what we're trying to achieve with an MVP, so not necessarily in the way that some organizations might look as MVP being the smallest thing that I'm going to deliver and then just incrementally build on it. But if we want to get into the aspect of actually saying, you know what, in a fast changing dynamic world, where there's a lot of complexity, maybe learning fast is the thing that we want to go after, then think about how you could significantly shorten that feedback loop. Obviously, depending on the organizational size and all the other constraints. But again, we speak about agility. Before we used to talk about large organizations like banks and institutions being like the big tanker ships, right? That take ages to be able to turn around, and how the small organizations and small startups were like the speedboats that could swiftly adapt to change and turn around and change direction very quickly. Well, think about it from that point of view. If you've got an organization or aspects of organization who are able to significantly reduce the amount of time it takes them to go through design thinking, to come up with a few hypotheses, to come up with some MVPs at very low cost very quickly, put it out there, get some feedback, and actually decide, that's the way we should go. Oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. And then, of course, from a market share point of view, from an agility point of view, business agility, being able to respond and adapt to change, then from that point of view, AI definitely supports that. So once again, We could have easily just said to it here, hey, do some feature prioritization, MVP scoping. So you just saw me do an example there. That doesn't mean that we're relying on the AI to do that. All we're doing is engaging in the process and still human in the loop, be able to make some decisions around it. Rapid wireframes and UX mock-ups. I mean, I think it's already been mentioned here. Let me see if I could quickly just show you this platform here. You've got many different platforms out there, right? So this one UI wizard, just put in the prompt. And before you know it, hold on 1 second. So I did this a bit earlier. See if it let us back in. So think about it also. Typically in the past, what you had is you had product owners who may not have been technical or may not have had access to the technical kind of tools that they needed to be able to create the wireframes. Of course, we would be able to create the kind of low fidelity wireframes and stuff. But imagine now you have a product owner who's not necessarily technical, but can quickly use tools like this to be able to put in a prompt and get back. Ah, not taking me through the whole process, but quickly get back a prototype which they can then play around with, maybe put it in front of a beta group of people to get even more rapid feedback, or if nothing else, hand it over to developers and other people to say, hey, here's actually what I'm thinking about. Think about what that might mean in terms of shortening the time it takes to be able to, you know, take your idea, get some instant feedback, etc. Okay, you can create click-through prototypes using different systems. So once again, changing, shortening the process that it takes, user testing, feedback analysis. So a lot of the time when we do our simulations around user testing, actually to get the feedback, we've already said before, because of its ability, AI can analyze data very, very quickly. It can do it in a significant amount of time. It can also spot patterns that we wouldn't be able to spot. It can also be more aware of other trends and possibilities. We could tell it to be innovative, because if you think about it, you could break innovation down to an algorithm or some form of prompt, which is might be a case of, hey, look at all the ways that this has been done before and identify new ways where it hasn't been done before, which are likely to be successful. You could easily be able to prompt that in to create something which is actually much more innovative. So we can get the innovation cycle a lot shorter, right? And at the end of it, we could then also just say to it, okay, based on what we're trying to achieve here, based on all the outcomes that we receive from the prototyping side of things, what would you recommend as a tech stack and architectural drafting? Again, with the technology out there, with large language models, and this goes back to a lot of discussion that's happening in the industry right now, is actually, should they be using third parties? Do you build them in-house? If you build them in-house, then you can be a lot more strategic in how you create it, what type of instructions you give it. You can help it. It can also help you to automate your workflows and get involved in that type of stuff. So you can make it really bespoke, which then becomes a very competitive type tool when done properly. Okay. But then moving on. Okay, so let's assume for that process, you've significantly shortened your design thinking, your prototyping, you're getting your feedback, you're now getting a better understanding of which ways to go. And then now we start moving into the delivery. Well, how can you use it to support delivery? Ensure, once again, human in the loop. I've seen some of the posts out there where people are totally using it just for sprint planning and taking the human beings out. Hopefully, you're getting the impression right now. For me, I mean, at the heart of it, agility, yes, we're trying to create value, but also about collaboration, about individuals and interactions. And so, rather than it doing the whole sprint planning, once again, it can be used to support. Here's the key thing. I'm not saying that, oh, you just get the AI to write your user stories and, because if we think about it, what is a user story? In effect, it's a agreement for us to have some form of conversation. In that conversation, we're going to learn a lot more. Is potentially going to improve our team building, our collaboration. So we still want to keep those things in there. But could we use it to be able to help us to give us some initial user stories to discuss? 100%. Some of you may come from a product ownership or product management background. I know I was a business analyst for many years. It's a lot of work analyzing a document and then breaking it down into stories and epics and getting acceptance criteria and knowing when to split it and whatnot. This can be a feed into it, which then enables us to bring our experience to still do all that stuff, but it significantly shortens that loop in terms of sprint planning. making sure that we've got the right capacity. Do we have the right tool set? I mean, right skill sets available for a given sprint? Um, what can we, in terms of our forecasting and prediction, 100%, we can use those. All of these things, which are inputs into sprint planning, we can use AI to assist us in doing that. However, we still, as the human beings, are in the loop, bringing in our expertise, experience, and knowledge to that sprint planning session. Oops, a daisy, don't know what's going on there. Um, Technology there. So I think that's just going to jump. But anyway, what about daily stand-ups? Again, we can use that to be analyzing real time what's happening. So part of the daily stand-up, we want to be tracking our progress towards the sprint goal. We want to know quickly, can we inspect and adapt and still achieve it? Or what do we need to communicate out? We can use the AI to support that as part of the daily stand-up to make sure that actually we're putting in the right information. We can use it to create digital dashboards and stuff so that we can actually see where we are. It can make suggestions and help us to understand, are we likely to be on track? What other things can we try? What other bits and pieces? You could use it once again, depending on what the organizational setup is, to be able to provide that information, but once again, ensuring that you've got the team's buy-in into how that information is being drawn in to be able to help to see how well we are doing in terms of delivery, etc. In terms of a sprint review, we could then once again help. We'll use it to be able to help us to highlight actually what are the key learnings that we've taken from it. Of course, human beings can do that, but if nothing else, in terms of generating the reports, the information that we might send out to stakeholders. I don't know about you, but many times, even as a Scrum Master and Agile coach, sometimes you're required to do that. I mean, that significantly reduces the mental load around that. If we get the permission from everybody and we're recording it, or we're getting some notes that we are taking, we can then just summarize that and put that into a report, put it into the right format. In terms of sprint retrospectives, again, in terms of moving away from just having a boring retrospective, which is the same old every single time, AI can support in suggesting, when we give it the context, oh, this is happening, here's what we're seeing, here's some of the challenges that we're seeing, what would you suggest are some of the things that we should be doing as part of the retrospective? It could also we can use AI to be able to analyze some of the patterns that we're seeing, and from a systems thinking point of view, it can help us to actually identify, hey, here are potentially some of the root causes, here are some continuous improvement experiments that you might want to run, and we can then feed that back into it and get some suggestions about how, once again, we might be able to improve those things. And backlog refinement, all of those different things we can use AI within. Again, I'm not a firm believer that we should use AI for everything. We should use it to be able to supplement what we are bringing and the human interaction, which is fundamentally important. I'm a firm believer, and some of you have done the kind of team health and looked at it. If we don't take care of the team and try and bring AI in a way that is not supported by the team and does not lead to better team collaboration, like I said, psychological and emotional safety amongst the team, then it may be counterproductive. I wouldn't want to set up a sprint or a scrum or an iteration whereby it's just about AI. I would not want to do that. However, to use it to support the team in being able to deliver more value, in using it to support the organization to adapt a lot quicker and achieve agility, yes. In using it to support evidence-based management, 100%. In those ways, definitely would be using it. And so now that part worked there. So that's some of the other key things that we are just talking about there, in different ways that it can be used. And we already looked at the ways you could use it to create epics, user stories, segments, criteria, features, whatever you want. However, don't let it lead. Also, still have a human being in the loop with all of that. Okay. And beyond that, like we said, systems thinking. As a Scrum Master or an Agile coach, you've got to be able to understand context. As we've heard before, it's not just about, oh, on page 9 of the Scrum Guide, it says this, and this is what it says in SAFe. Well, no, there's the experience that we need to bring to the table. There's the context. There's the understanding from a systems thinking point of view that actually what we are doing here may have an impact on the rest of the organization or some other parts that are touching and interacting with the teams or the individuals. What are the potential implications of this? If we move in this direction or we do this, what are some of the things that we might see? Therefore, what could we put in place to be able to highlight it if it does happen, or for us to be able to minimize the impact? With AI, it's a lot easier to be able to do that, which was previously a lot harder when we didn't have that. Team health monitoring, all those type of things, data visualization, insights, all that good stuff, which are important to us being able to maintain a team. Again, it's about strategically thinking. How can we utilize the capabilities of AI to improve what we said we were trying to do with Agile. And again, we make sure that we stick to those core values if we still align with them and feel that they're important, which is about actually how do we take care of the people? How do we use this information to create continuous improvements? How do we use AI to be able to give us the right data at the right time so we can inspect and adapt, but driving it by a human being? And next step, we move on to the delivery side of things. Deliver, measure, learn, improve. Again, that cycle. As we know from before AI, those teams who could do this in the right way and get through that cycle quickest tend to win. How do you create something? How do you measure what it's achieved? How do you get an understanding, inspect it to understand, actually, is this in line with what I was thinking? Is it different? Even if it was in line with my thinking, what was I missing? What has this revealed? What are the things that we didn't know that we now know? Or what else don't we know right now? And all that other great stuff for us to keep going through that process. When you start talking about actually utilizing AI within that context, and we're not even going to talk about no code delivery and no code building and all that other stuff, which they're talking about, hey, they might be moving towards, we'll see, right? But the bottom line is, how quickly then can you utilize these to get through these processes? And the reality is nowadays it is significantly easier. Again, I think where we're going to see the difference is within organizations that are utilizing AI to support what they're doing. Are likely to see a significant drop in the amount of time it's taking them, which may then also interpret into cost, versus organizations that are not utilizing it. I think we're also going to see a significant difference between organizations that have AI'd everything. Hey, boom, let's just turn everything into AI type thing versus those who are recognizing you still need human beings. You still need the context. You still need their experience, and support those individuals in being able to use the AI tools to support what they do already. And so that a lot more value can be created. And importantly, I think also from an evidence-based management point of view, we can also then start having key metrics in place, actually being able to analyze those metrics and use them as cues, right? Actually, when they reach a certain point, depending on what the metrics is, giving us an indication very early, lead indicators as to when we might need to change our direction, when we might need to pivot, persevere, and all that other great stuff. And I see that from a strategic point of view, AI can only help make that a lot better for us in organizations. So, and in the moment I'll open it up. I see there's lots of questions in there. I haven't had a chance to look in the chat, but we can have a discussion around that. So here's the final take on this. From an agile point of view, if we buy into the fact that agility really is not about frameworks, it's not about methods, it's not about velocity ceremonies and all that stuff, that in the world that we existed in, that the frameworks, methods were the tools that we were using in order to achieve, or were intended to be the things that we used to achieve the outcome, which was the value. And that the things like the velocity and the practices within that were kind of the things that we might use to be able to gauge where we were or to execute. Then what we then recognize is AI supports that 100%. It helps us to get to the value. It helps us. And in that process, it might mean that how we execute some of those practices, how we execute some of those methods and frameworks may change. And as an Agilist, I think that is okay. If we're about continuous improvement, bearing in mind the Agile Manifesto said we are uncovering ways, better ways. Well, AI is here right now. I don't think there's any denying that it can add value when used in the right way. Again, I say it's a tool. So therefore, it's about us as human beings, how we use this tool to achieve the outcomes that we want, or the outcomes that are best for the organization, or for the value that we have defined as relevant to the customers or users that we're going after, whatever that is. We can then use AI to be able to support that. And I think it's going to be down to those individuals who recognize that, who will do very well. So again, AI helps us refocus on the outcomes, not the rituals. Of my career, I've been a big, some of you might have seen my posts in the past saying like, Scrum, Kanban, safe, whatever. I'm really more interested in the results. And so sometimes some approaches are better than others. Hey, I'd even go as far as to say, and please don't crucify from this. In the past, I'm like, well, sometimes, well, why are you even trying to do that as an agile? Just do it as waterfall. That makes sense in that context, whatever. Okay, it's really about the outcomes. And so I believe that AI will help us to now start focusing on outcomes, not just the rituals. I think that may be good for the agile community as a whole, because I mean, some of the downside we've seen is that we haven't always been so good at achieving the outcomes or measuring the outcomes, but we've been good at promoting, hey, this is Scrum, this is Kanban, this is that. And a lot of people, if we're going to be honest, in big organizations have got, not buying that anymore. And so now when we get to a point of actually achieving outcomes and being able to measure it and demonstrate it, then I think that's going to be a great thing. We can use AI to supercharge our ideation, delivery, and feedback. So we can understand that actually we won't know everything. However, we can use it to do better ideation. We can use it to improve our delivery. Once again, we have to make the decisions at what points and where do we want to introduce it, and feedback. We've already got automation in terms of testing and deployments. Then how do we actually start utilizing AI, which you can easily do to actually get some feedback, get those deployments out there quicker, get some feedback and inspect and adapt a lot quicker. Again, faster feedback loops gives us faster learning. And I think in a time of the great change, that actually faster learning is the key thing, right? We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And therefore, that's not always clear. And so it's going to really be about faster learning, especially as we move into this stage of actually introducing this new technology. As we say when we're talking about agile delivery, short sprints or short iterations give us faster feedback loops. And that might be what we need to start doing now in terms of even how we introduce it in, so we can learn very quickly what does it mean within our context, what's its potential, how do we use it, what are the downsides, what are the risks, how do we counter all of that stuff. And we can start using that to actually get closer to much more to measurable business value, moving away from things like just velocity and all those type of things, but actually getting to what are the measurable business value. How do we know actually this is really delivering some form of value? Um, in the context that we find ourselves in, we can get that information a lot quicker, which might mean that decisions are made a lot quicker in regards to where we're going with the product, service, or whatever it is we're trying to create. And even it might mean sometimes actually doing that thing that sometimes is the best thing to do, to say, actually, stop, call it a day here. No more Las Vegas kind of cognitive bias going on here. Count our losses. Let's move on. Let's take our money. Let's take our resources. And when I say resources, I never refer to human being as resources. I'm talking about resources and our human beings, and actually go after something that may be a lot more aligned to the outcomes that we're going after. And so, yeah. And now I'm going to just open it up to any questions and stuff. Input, thoughts. Over to you.
Thank you, Ade. So maybe just to piggy off your last bullet around metrics and not just using velocity, like what are your thoughts on using AI tools, and what do you, I guess, if you're seeing or envisioning, like even Jira, like, looking at the whole like value stream, or like, part of the value stream, and using more like lead time, cycle time, understanding where the bottlenecks are really in the system. Because a lot of times, we talk about these things, but I've had clients where like we're going from one Excel or exporting things, they're not consistent. You don't have, where you think where the issues are, but the data is not consistent. What are your thoughts as far as maybe where things are going, or what you're seeing by using better metrics to go back to what you said, deliver outcomes, not just worry about how you do it, but to actually deliver them?
Yeah, sure. And I think that's an awesomely great question. I mean, one of the things that I'm seeing and I'm encouraging a lot of the clients that I work with is, even when we're creating the business cases, hey, let's also, as part of that, use AI to actually do some to make some suggestions around what do we think are the best metrics in this situation. In my experience, when I've been in many organizations, it might be just organizations that I've been in. Human beings are not always the best at identifying the key metrics. We can end up with vanity metrics. And sometimes when you're in organizations, depending on the political and all the other outlines, the metrics sometimes are questionable. You're like, really? Is that really going to mess that? I saw I saw a post on LinkedIn today, which was about agile maturity assessments. I'm sure many people here got their different views about agile maturity assessments and etc. and how they are then used. But to your point, what I'm seeing is organized, the more mature actually recognizing, hey, maybe we don't really know. We got some ideas. Maybe we're going to use evidence-based management. What are the right metrics that we should be using here? And then using AI to also then support and ask, okay, cool, how would we measure that? But using a human in the loop to then say, okay, yes, these are the key metrics that we're going to go after. These are the key points, and then building it into some of their kind of systems, their LLMs, so that the system understands to flag up and also use leading indicators to say, hey, look at these key metrics. Also, as we all know, sometimes we can go through that process and say, hey, actually, maybe we should be measuring some other metrics. There's the stuff we don't know, right? And so AI is also good for that. If we enable it to once again flag us and say, hey, by the way, we are seeing this, this is happening, this is a potential outcome. By the way, you might also want to be measuring that. So again, I think it's going to be based on the context. How we bring AI into the process means that we also move from that one cap fits all and be able to use the right metrics at the right times to indicate what we might need. And we also recognize that depending on the phases that we are in within the delivery, hey, it's okay to actually have different metrics to indicate different things depending on what signals and what we're trying to see. So I think that's also what's happening and we're seeing.
Great, thank you. Others, what questions do you have? Questions for Ade? Do you have any thoughts on this? Either put it in the chat or just go off mute.
The one path race towards AI. So yeah, anyone got any questions? What's this one? Okay, yes, Heath.
Oh yeah, I would just say, no, great speech. And talk here. You're speaking all the language that I've been trying to speak the last year or so as we've adopted AI. Just been helping some clients kind of build like apps like right off the bat. Like they're all reaching out to me going, "Hey, how can I leverage AI?" And I'm just applying like that agile AI kind of mindset to use ChatGPT to do exactly what you're doing, building out your MVPs. I think one of the things that I really like to in ChatGPT, a little technique that you can add in there is like ask it to ask you questions, right? I love doing that because you could be like, hey, as an agile coach who is looking to adopt AI that has my own company, right? Agyle dot AI, ask me 20 questions about my business or my customer case so you can better understand my company. So then you can help me create my MVP, right? But I like doing that because then it kind of helps train the AI a little bit to do that. But no, really appreciate the talk and a lot of great insights.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that that's a spot on. And this goes back to what we were talking about before, right? The context is key. And that's the experience that we bring to it, right? And we can train our AI assistants and GPTs to be able to ask the right questions of us and help us even understand what we're not thinking about. Just a quick thing around that. That's why I created this platform, which is Agile AI, made up of a number of different assistants which understand different contexts based on human beings and bring experience. And it asks the different questions depending on what it is that we're trying to achieve. And so this is just, this is a tool that I've created, but the ability and the technology exists for organizations to be able to do that. And I think where we're going to start seeing organizations really excelling is when they understand the technology, can build it into their context, make it really relevant to what they do and refine it and get it to learn at the same time. And I think then it supports the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So 100%
Yeah.
agree with you.
Yeah, I think the future is going to be like small language models, right? Where you're going to have like specific like so I work with the US military and it's one of the things that I'm trying to kind of help think about is like you have like a specific program, right, with specific data, very, security, right? But creating like its own model. So then you can like generate your user stories and your all of your requirements based on that specific data. So it's all air gapped and secure. But
That's what I
no,
was alluding to earlier too around organizational design, like where like most companies that you go into, they talk about what their structure looks like, they think they know what their metrics look like, but if you ask anybody to put money where their mouth is or where their assumptions are, nobody's willing to. So like exactly what you're saying, like having these trained specifically for your organization, and imagine like after it learns how you operate through different feedback loops. I think that's going to be another tool. Again, you're going to need humans, but I
Yeah.
have
Like,
gone into so many engagements or into so many organizations, and it's just you spend so much time just to understand the mess,
yeah.
and you still don't fully understand
I, I
well.
had I don't know if you guys know Andrew Clay Schaefer. He's pretty much one of the guys that coined the term DevOps. He was at a conference and actually posted on June 23rd, 2008. He said DevOps on Twitter, and that's how it all started. But so I had hit him on my podcast yesterday, and we were talking about I don't know if you guys are familiar with John Boyd and the OODA loop, right?
Mhm.
John Boyd created the OODA loop and Orient, Observe, Decide, and Act. And before the OODA loop, he wrote something called the Aerial Attack Study, which was this a document about the fighter jets that were being built in the 60s before the F-16. It was all the bomber pilots from World War II that were now the generals in the Pentagon, and they were designing these planes that were just not, not agile enough. And so he, said, hey, the Russians are going to have air superiority within the next few years. And so he wrote this aerial attack study. Well, anyways, yesterday during my podcast, we were talking about that, about like every program or every customer should kind of write their own aerial attack study, right? It should be like their own document with that same type of information that's very specific. And then we'll start seeing training these like small language models that will extract that aerial attack study information, and you'll have this kind of air gapped, AI model that you can use to do all the things that AD's talking about here, as far as specific, requirements and MVP and designs, and very tailored. So it was a unique conversation we had yesterday about that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think a lot of this, as I said, is speculation. We don't know how quickly these things will, how quickly we'll evolve with it, but it's definitely exciting times. And Arturo put a interesting. I mean, like I do think, yeah, some of this is maybe overwhelming, and it is for some more than other. But I also agree with the second part of your statement about, you know, in general, things moving towards entropy, not just applications, but any type of complex system. So that's the nature, I guess, of things when they're highly intertwined. But
Look, I agree with that point as well. I think the key thing here is, once again, I think AI is really got to be how you do it strategically. Yeah. Now, I definitely wouldn't say for complex applications end to end. Nah, you may not use it. However, for things like what we've been demonstrated here, an organization that might use it at the beginning parts and then go into their complex build stage is going to be way ahead of an organization or team that says, well, we're not going to use it at all, even for the MVP or getting the insights or doing the data analysis. And so that's the world we live in. I think one of the great sayings I've heard around AI is AI won't take over the world. It's people who know how to use AI well who will, right? And so I don't think AI is coming for any of our jobs, but the people who understand how to do this will create more value. And in a capitalistic system where it's based on value, then yes, your job may be at risk if you're not able to deliver as much value as somebody who can use AI to create and demonstrate the real value.
exactly. And I think this is, and we're out of time, but we can use the 10 minutes. So if people need to take the break, I think this is like where, in specifically in relation to Scrum Masters, where like if you're not a good Scrum Master or coach, or if you're just used to answering questions and facilitating things for a team, that's going to be easy to replace. But good coaches, people that understand how to get and help teams, how to help them improve. I don't think AI is going to be there because everything that we've discussed so far, the context, the human nature of things, and everything. So um, that's my perspective, and I don't know what others have, but I've had a lot of people with concerns around, or heard a lot of people with concerns about, what's going to happen to scrum masters, agile coaches, and I think the problems don't go away. It's just
Yeah, I think the other perspective to think about is like, focusing back on outcomes, right? That he was talking about. You see like companies like McDonald's and Starbucks right now are actually pulling back from AI because they're not getting the outcomes that the investments that they originally, thought, right? And I think if you pull on the thread a bit more, going full on automation and AI and skipping the people part of it, right? Like Starbucks wants to have that personalized experience, right? They want to go into the store and have somebody pour them a cup of coffee, or McDonald's, have go to the Golden Arches and get that Big Mac and have that experience. So, but I think for in our industry, that the people process, right? It's still going to be there, right? It's just AI is going to help leverage that. I mean, if you've got that skill set of being able to help your customer navigate the complexity of program management and building systems and accelerating delivery and innovation. I mean, that's still going to be there. That those facilitation skills. I just think it's going to add a lot more. I mean, there's the whole other piece, the technical side of it. You're seeing an explosion in these AI tools, like the big thought leaders, like Solomon Hykes that created Docker, and Kosuke that created Jenkins, and these guys are creating some pretty cool AI tools now that are spinning up containers with AI, and you got Dagger doing that. You got Launchable where they're using AI tests, right? So it's actually taking the job away of the tester, right? Where it's looking at existing tests and then creating the tests. And so I think that's just going to continue to accelerate, obviously, but I think there's still going to be a need for somebody like us to be in the room facilitating a PI planning event, to be sitting there one-on-one with a VP or a leader to kind of help mentor them, coach them, and also at the team and tactical level as well.
Yeah, and Arthur has another great question. Yeah, I think it will replace those jobs. And how do we cover the gap? I mean, how would we covered it before? I think cross training, getting people to understand and skilling up people. So I think we know how to upskill and how to get people. It's just it's going to be both individual investment as well as companies investing in people and developing that
I think
wisdom.
you're right there.
Yeah.
I think you're 100% right. I mean, in many ways, look, we've seen this all before, okay? When we replaced the horses with cars, right? Some people will go away and they will skill themselves up, or even when Agile was first introduced, right? Some of us remember before it was an industry, right? You'd go, you'd have to learn the skills, the context, the tools within the context, right? And that's going to be exactly the same thing, I think, with AI. I think we are at a still in the early stages, although at the speed of change that we're seeing, it's so fast. It's really going to be down to those individuals who are asking the right questions, as we're seeing here, and then identifying for themselves, well, what does that mean for me? What do I need to go away and learn? Where is this going? Where is actually the value going to be? To your point, I mean, about agile coaches and scrum masters, I mean, some might argue that the market at this moment in time is oversaturated with people with that title. So maybe AI is going to help identify actually who's bringing the real skill sets and can create the real value, and that might actually be a good thing overall. So we'll see.